So I got a question a couple days ago that I've actually gotten several times throughout my years of teaching, which was, is there a way to write to the console and to an external file at the same time? Now, the short answer is no, not that I'm aware of. But the slightly better answer is, yeah, we can actually do that with just a little bit of work. So I'm going to show you a way to do this. I'm going to show you a better way, and then I'm going to show you what I consider to be the best way to do this. So let's get started. So I've got a pretty simple Python file here, and I'm doing Python because that was what was asked of me, was in working with Python. So this same concept is going to work for a lot of different programming languages, but we're going to use Python as just the example here. I've already created a file for output for writing. I call it my out file, and it's inside of a main function, and I'm calling that main function. Right now, this isn't doing anything. So let's take a very simple example, and let's say you had num1 and equals 5, num2 it equals 8. So if I want to go and print this out to the screen, it's real simple. Print, and then I'm going to concatenate this all into one string. You're going to see why in just a minute. So I'm going to say str, which will convert it into a string. What am I converting into a string? Num1, concatenate that. Okay. If I come in and run this, you'll see in my output section that it says 5 plus 8 equals 13, which is exactly what I would be expecting. Now, if I want to write this to my output file, I'll just say outfile.write. And I'm going to just copy and paste this because that's easy. And I'm going to append a new line character. If I run this again, I see my output is written there. And if I come in here and open up my data.txt file, I'll see the 5 plus 8 equals 13. Of course, this could be anything that I want. It doesn't have to be a simple mathematical function. The downside is it could be anything I want. And so, for example, let's say I was doing something that took a while to calculate, like a Fibonacci sequence. Well, now we have a potential problem because the Fibonacci sequence can take a long time to run depending upon how many numbers out we're going. It's a recursive function. It takes a while to process. So we always need to be figuring out, okay, is this the best way? Well, we can cut our processing time in half if we do it a slightly better way. So the simple way I'm going to do is I'm going to say result here, and I'm going to get equal to what my previous value was. And now, instead of having this big, long, quote-unquote formula, I'm going to put in my result variable. And I'm going to do the same thing for my output.write. So now, if I have something that takes a half second or 5 minutes to run or however long it might be, and I've run particular algorithms depending upon how complicated it was. I've run some that have run for over 30 minutes just for one line of code because that line of code called a function that took a lot of time to process a lot of data. So being able to cut our processing time in half is a better way of doing it. And if I save this and run it real quick, you'll notice I still have my output result, 5 plus 8 equals 13. And over here in my data file, it still displays my 5 plus 8 equals 13 as well. It took the exact same information. This is the better way. But it's not the best way. And that's for a couple of reasons. Number one is actually something we've already just seen. And that is something called DRY. Now, DRY is an acronym that programmers use, and it means don't repeat yourself. And when we took our calculation and put it into a variable called result, what we did is we only did our calculation one time. We don't have to repeat doing that calculation. We saved ourselves time. but we also potentially saved ourselves from having a mistake. Because the more times I write something, the more times I'm likely to have a mistake. And right now, I'm having to do two separate outputs. But the problem with that is I might have two outputs 24 times, or 100 times, or 1,000 times. And I always have to remember to both print to the console and to my output file. So I'm doing twice the amount of work every time I have to do this, and there's got to be an easier way. And there actually is. So let's see real quick how we're going to make this an easier way. So I'm going to come outside of my main function, and I'm going to create a new function. I'm going to call this super output, and my parameters, I'm going to take two values. I'm going to take a value that I want to output, value, and my output file that I'm just going to call out. Now, I'm going to assume that this output file has already been opened, and we're going to pass that to it. And this is a pretty safe assumption in this case, but I'm going to give you an example later on that's going to show you where we might want to open up our own file. So here we have super output, we have value, and we have out, which is our output file. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to simply say print value, and that's going to print it to the console. And then I'm going to say out.write value plus, and then once again, I'm going to add the new line character. This is the whole thing of what super output is going to be. Now, I'm going to remove my print and out file write statement and say super output results and out file. Just to prove that this is going to run, I'm going to delete the contents out of data.txt. So those are gone. I say run. Here's my output to my console. Open up data.txt. There's my output. So this now simplifies it so where I am calling a single command to write to both the console and my output file. Now, this is assuming that we have an output file to write to and that it's already been created and we pass it in. There's an advantage to that, and that advantage is simply that, well, I get to choose what my output file is going to be. Because maybe I don't want data.txt all the time. Maybe I have two different files that need to be printed to, depending upon what the value and what my equation is. So having that flexibility is very beneficial for me. The one time I probably do want to not have to include the output file, but open that file internally, is if I'm writing to a log file. So if I have like an error log file, I might then want to open that up inside of my logging function, similar to my super output, and I'll just append data to that log file. Now, in appending, if the file doesn't exist, it creates the file for me. If it does exist, it just puts it at the end. So it becomes really beneficial as far as that goes to make it easier to work with. So that's an example of where I sometimes do want to have an opening of the file inside of it, because I'm not keeping track of what my output file for logging is going to be inside my main program. So it just kind of depends on what you need. A lot of times we can't do something directly in a programming language, but in a case like this with a very simple function, we can simulate and basically create what we're looking for. And this is just a simple example in Python. It would have been very similar to do if I used Java, C++, or almost any other language.